The British government forces landlords to foot the bill for famine relief. But their response only adds to the suffering. Today, children play outside a monument to misery, a notorious institution called the workhouse. This building, and scores like it, held famine victims as virtual prisoners. In a village near Ballykilcline, Professor Orser examines a cast-iron artifact of despair.
And this was the pot that used to make the soup for the people when they were here.
In the dark days of 1847, 3 million people, over 1/3 of the entire nation, line up for a meager bowl of watery barley soup. One woman recalls her father's ordeal.
There was one large pot resting in stones in the workhouse yard, and in this huge pot was made gruel to be distributed to a constant stream of starving people. The people came by every road to the workhouse for their measure of gruel.
More like a labor camp than a refuge. The workhouse is the ultimate humiliation. Inmates trade hard labor for starvation rations. Meals must be eaten in silence. Break the rules, and you're locked away in solitary confinement. One account recalled.
The victims preferred to die at home, even the destitute refusing to avail of their open doors.
Many see the landlord's miserly charity as a heartless scheme to force them off their land.
If you wanted relief, if you wanted to go to a workhouse, you had to surrender your holding before you could do that.
The workhouse often kills more than it saves. Cramped and overcrowded, infested with rats and lice, it's the perfect breeding ground for disease. One resident confides.
Black spots gradually crossed the body. Lips became bloodless. It was dreaded more than the actual hunger.
Victims call it famine fever, but in reality, they are dying from typhoid and dysentery. Killer infections sweep through a population weakened by years of famine. The epidemic claims hundreds of thousands of lives. By the middle of 1847, Ireland's workhouses are swamped by the sick and the dying. Costs are mounting. The landlords come up with a cheap fix. Instead of feeding the starving in the workhouse, they'll just ship them off to America. On September 5th, 1847, 111 of the Nary's neighbors have no choice but to surrender their beloved land. A mass exodus begins. It's a 4-day march to Dublin and the sea. But many don't make it to the Irish capital, let alone to the promised land of America. One eyewitness reports.
I have seen a never-ending stream of gaunt, dejected-looking ghost-like figures shuffling along the roads. The elderly and the little children were the first to fall victims to the fatigues of the march.
The heart is ripped out of rural Ireland. All they have left, the distant promise of America.
One of the sad consequences of the famine was that a lot of the brightest and the most learned and the most talented and the most gifted people either immigrated or died.
But Ireland's loss will soon be America's gain. The havoc wreaked by famine turns a trickle of Irish emigrants into a flood. In just 5 years, 1 million men, women, and children leave for America. For many, It's the first time they've ventured more than 20 miles from home. Ahead lies a 3,000-mile voyage into the unknown.
The famine would have still been with them, and they would have been spending 6 or 8 weeks tossing around in the North Atlantic, not knowing where they were going or what was going to happen to them when they got there.
It's a hazardous crossing, sometimes lasting over 2 months, on old, leaky ships. With too many people, too little food, and typhoid raging, the workhouse all over again. On these infamous coffin ships, many, like this survivor, wish they'd stayed at home to die.
Then we'd be buried along with our people in the old churchyard, with the green sod over us, instead of lying like rotten sheep, thrown into a pit and flung into the sea to be eaten by them horrid sharks.
Well, it was an extraordinary trip over here, and the loss of life was very significant. Even those that even got here, many died during the crossing. It was a very hard trip. They call it the Vale of Tears. I mean, there were so many members of the family that died during the passage itself.
The death toll is highest among those tenants evicted from Dennis Mahan's Strokestown estate, right next to Ballykilcline. On one of Mahan's ships, 268 people die. As the coffin ships live up to their name, the farmers' worst suspicions are confirmed. An Irish activist voices their fears.
Nothing could persuade the people that emigration was not a plot on their lives.
Now rumors spread that another ship chartered by landlord Dennis Mahan and filled with his tenants has sunk without a trace. Mahan becomes a marked man. It's dusk on a chilly November day. Mahan is on his way back to the comfort of his manor house. The gunshot that kills Mahan echoes across Britain, fueling anti-Irish hatred.
It becomes a huge story, which is reported in massive detail in the Dublin press, the London press. What has civilization come to when a landlord is murdered in such a barbaric fashion?
That winter, 6 more landlords are murdered. The authorities respond with force. County Roscommon now becomes the focus of a manhunt for the killers.
The place was saturated with police and army and so on, and it increased the ability of the estate to actually evict tenants.
At the site of the Nerys' home, Orser finds telltale signs of wholesale destruction.
We can tell that there was an eviction, that the house was actually physically torn down. This would be the gable end of the wall that's probably been pushed down by the people who had done the evictions to make sure no one could come back and live there. So it looks as if the walls were simply tumbled down on top of any artifacts that the people couldn't remove. There's an attempt to erase these people from the landscape, and they were very good at it.
After a decade of resistance, anguish, and death, the last traces of the Neri family are erased from the land. Across Roscommon, rent collectors finish the job with brutal efficiency. One even pats himself on the back.
I am happy to say that the levelling of the houses has been done most effectively. There's not a wall left standing, and the stones are removed to the foundation.
In the words of one rent collector, Ballykilcline is perfectly untenanted. Like hundreds of thousands of their countrymen, the Neris now face a heart-wrenching dilemma: to risk a harrowing journey to America or a bleak future in the land of their birth. The Irish village of Ballykilcline in the county of Roscommon has been wiped off the map. Its 500 people lost to famine or eviction. Like the Neris, the survivors are homeless, wandering down a road to nowhere. But after a life of struggle, Mark Neri reaches his final destination. The famine claims 1 million lives, deaths unrecorded, stories untold.
The famine itself was something that most people didn't want to talk about. There's certain guilt feelings that some people may have as to why they survived and others didn't.
The potato blight never really leaves Ireland, but most of those who raised potatoes do.
So the blight never left. It's very much there. And meanwhile, actually, it's spread all over the world. So now it's a global issue. And it's only